we ran a really, really deep investigation into election security over at Vox. It was by Benjamin Wofford, and the piece, we'll put it in show notes, but it's called "The Midterms Are Already Hacked. You Just Don't Know It Yet." And it is, I would say, one of the scariest pieces of reporting I've read in some time. He talked to over 100 people involved in either election administration, election security, election analysis, and what they told him was genuinely scary. I want to start us out by reading this one passage because I think it frames a problem really well. He writes, "The United States this November, it won't have one midterm election or even 50, but a number closer to 10,000. Elections, he's saying here, are locally administrated, and it's these local officials, not the NSA, the FBI, or the Department of Homeland Security, who are standing foursquare against cyber attackers in November. It's as if America's most ancient civilian office, the local election clerk, has become saddled with new and alien responsibilities tantamount to a military contractor." And now here's a quote. "We are at a fundamental disadvantage because it's not a fair fight," says a big tech security expert who spoke on Background. "It's now every county versus the FSB, which is the acronym for Russia's version of the CIA." So that seems bad.
That seems very bad. And I think one of the interesting things about this piece, which I highly recommend everyone go read, is how it talks about election vulnerabilities that fall into three broad camps, so to speak. So there is the targeting of individual campaigns through DDoS attacks and that kind of thing, email theft, meddling, the hacking of our national discourse, propaganda efforts, which I think is what a lot of people are most familiar with when we talk about the 2016 election and Russian interference. And the, I think, most concerning to me is the vulnerability of the technology itself that underlies the election infrastructure. And I think that that's been something that's been coming up a lot recently. There was a Twitter thread that went around yesterday that was talking about how in Texas, apparently on some of the touchpad election devices, it was switching people's votes. People who had voted straight ticket, this specific person had voted straight ticket Democrat. When they went back through their votes, they saw that their vote for Beto O'Rourke had been switched to a vote for Ted Cruz. And they talked to the elections office in Texas, and Texas responded by saying, oh, this has been happening for years. It's just, you have to go back and check because this can happen all the time.
Neat.
And my first thought, that doesn't sound at all reassuring. But the fact that because this is a local problem, these are local officials trying to deal with something that now takes on national importance.
So there's this line you hear sometimes when you worry about elections being hacked, which is that the unbelievable multiplicity of election administration in America is some kind of advantage, because what folks will say is, look, you can't hack the American election. You can't hack the presidential election. You would have to hack all these different counties. And on the one hand, maybe that's somewhat reassuring because it would take more resources to do it. It's not like you could just find one vulnerability and exploit the whole thing. But on the other hand, I think people need to think about this a little bit more. So it would not be hard for Russians or North Koreans, or honestly, just anyone, right? A group of effective hackers who just want to sow chaos to identify six midterm House races that could flip the House, or 12, or in a presidential election to log on to the Upshot or log on to 538 and figure out what are a couple of counties in a couple of key states that could really change the outcome. And then let's say they don't even quite succeed. Let's just say they go in and they leave enough havoc in enough of them and then leak it to the press, such that all election results suddenly become contested, such that all the election results fall under doubt. I think people forget this, but there was a big argument about what Russia was trying to do in the 2016 election and what previously to succeeding beyond their wildest dreams and electing Vladimir Putin's best friend, Donald Trump, what they thought they were doing in America, which was not actually that they were going to hack the election and change who won. They didn't think they could do that. What they were going to do was sow chaos. What they were going to do was show that America's vaunted political system, its democracy, is not that democratic, it's not that trustworthy, it's not that safe, and they're going to turn us against each other by just throwing everything into doubt. And if you imagine this not as like a hacking operation, but as a dissension operation, like as an operation to sow instability and chaos, it would not at all be hard to target a couple of the weakest and most critical county election systems. And whether or not you actually change the votes, you could certainly leave enough havoc to make people wonder if you had. And trying to imagine what the aftermath of that would be, it's not like we have strong procedures in this country. We don't have a procedure for rerunning an election because now we don't believe the outcome. We have no idea what would happen, and we're not even talking about this effectively.
Right. And I think that there's something to be said about the notion that the goal was not inherently, with Russian interference or with interference in general, the goal is not necessarily like, we want to elect a specific person. It is to put the entire electoral process under scrutiny and raise questions about whether or not your votes count. And I think that that goes to kind of the second part of those three broad camps in which our election vulnerabilities fall into, which is, information operations. And the piece goes into how there's been trainings based on mock scenarios, like a viral Facebook post that claims Latino voters are barred from voting, that's being sent from a fake account mimicking the regional ACLU. And I think people who were deeply online in 2015, 2016, remember kind of the very viral Reddit-created threads. And obviously, that's not Russian hackers. That's just people on Reddit or 4chan who are creating very, posts that look like they're coming from the campaign of Hillary Clinton or the campaign of Donald Trump that say things like, "We've got this, you don't need to vote," or telling people that they can vote by text message and then giving them a number, and the number actually works. And it says, like, "Thank you for voting," or something like that, which you think—
that's so devious.
Yeah, it's super devious. And for you and I, for majority of our listeners, they're thinking, who would fall for that? But then someone, of course, did. And trying to take back those kinds of posts or trying to take back information is virtually impossible once it's out there. And so it's interesting that there has been some efforts made at conferences and by security experts and officials trying to figure out what to do about these kinds of online posts that are coming not necessarily from, the FSB or from North Korea, but just from like the internet itself.
If we went back now and we could conclusively prove, or let me even put it differently, if we could not conclusively disprove that the key places in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania that swung those states in defiance of polling and expectations were correctly decided, if there was evidence of some tampering and now you had Republican county election administrators saying, "No, nothing happened, don't worry about it, we've looked into it," and you had like Democratic experts saying, no, this looks really wrong. Like we need to do audits, and now they're saying, "I'm sorry, we don't have paper ballots as a safeguard," which a lot of these machines don't. There's no way to do an audit. And so now you have an election that may no longer be legitimate. I mean, that kind of place, like that's where you can get into genuine civil violence, right? Because one side feels that another side is taking power, is basically mounting a coup. That's where you can get into really bad things. And so I feel like even as we've had demonstrations of how badly this can go, even as we've had like this like klaxon warning going off in our ears now for years, I feel like we are really lacking in imagination about how bad this could get and how fast. And like how good that would be for some of the people who would want it to be that way. I mean, a lot of other countries in the world, like what they would like is for America to be consumed by internal division. And like the really easy way to do that would be to delegitimize our political system at a time of very high polarization and very bitter competition. And like what this report is saying, like what this piece is saying, like what we know is it wouldn't be all that hard. And yet are we treating this as an emergency? No. It's like a complete, like we know people are trying to do this. We see it coming. We know they've already tried to do it. We know Russia tried to hack into some things during the 2016 election, actual election systems. It doesn't look like they succeeded, but maybe who knows? And we're not doing nearly enough. There's this quote in here from a security expert at a big technology corporation. He says, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being Pentagon security measures, elections have moved from a 2 to a 3. Like that's bad.
That's very bad. That's very not good.